Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have a fantastic and incredible episode for you guys, so sit back and enjoy. And so today we have a lot of people, great minds were thinking alike when they were sending in questions, because we had pretty much all the people sent questions about two topics. One about the ballroom, the White House ballroom demolition, or the White House ballroom creation and the demolition of the East Wing, and the NBA gambling scandal. So that's pretty much all of our questions, with some ones left at the end that we'll cover. But we'll first go with the ballroom scandal. Dave asked about this, and a bunch of people. Hold on, I think I'm gonna have to go through the list here of who else asked about it. We had about 2 or 3 other people who asked about this. And Deuteronormative and Renown also asked about it. So those are the 3 people. There may be one other person who did, but if I did not name you, you should rest assured I did answer your question. So we're going to talk about this. This is the big issue for liberals right now. They are freaking out over the demolition of the East Wing and how this is an entire threat to our democratic order, and it's our house, not his house. It's the people's house. He's destroying it. Frankly, in my opinion, I don't give a shit. The White House is still there. What they have for the East Wing is rather crummy. I've known people who've worked in the White House before. It's not that great a facility. It's the same with a lot of the government offices and other things. It's rare for us to spend money on it because we hate the idea of spending money on refurnishing and repairing and redoing government buildings. So Trump, gets his $300 million from private donors. Doesn't cost taxpayers anything. And now we're going to have this giant ballroom to host, dignitaries and ceremonies there that we now don't have. We use an elaborate tent. But generally, for me, I don't think that this is that important of a story. But it is funny that this is the most important story we have now. Because you have to remember, we have a shutdown. And the shutdown is starting to approach the record. Are getting pretty close. It's gone on for a lot longer than other government shutdowns. And no one really cares. They're trying to stir up people to care about this. They're like, all the SNAP people who aren't going to get their SNAP. There's going to be bread riots and disorder. The country's going to head to civil war. It's like, man, I've been through this multiple times. It's not going to happen. We're not going to have any social disturbance. I mean, they're trying to make the shutdown a thing in the media, but they can't. So now we're focusing on the damn ballroom because I think for me, I don't really care that much. And I think for a lot of us, we shouldn't care that much. It's like stupid lib thing is. But there is a mind especially for older people, that certain things of America should never be touched. And they have this impression, or they're working with this meme, that he is desecrating the White House. That this is a blasphemy, a sacrilege to our sacred hall, our sacred building that he's doing. This would be like the Catholic Church. Well, the Notre Dame was burnt down, but doing something radical at the Vatican, and something that we expect to be there. And this is like, how dare they do this? And there's the same impression they're trying to conjure up with the White House, is that this White House is supposed to be what it is for all time. And any changes to it is blasphemy. You're not supposed to touch it. And they especially don't like that Donald Trump is doing this, because this is Donald Trump trying to leave a lasting legacy, physical legacy, on the presidency. Because from now on, you're going to have this, fantastic ballroom attached to the White House. And that's always going to be Trump's addition and Trump's ballroom that he puts there. And they can never get rid of that. They're not going to demolish it themselves. So this is something that's deeply upsetting to libs and to even some other people. But it's just one of these things that they're trying to work up and people get mad about. But for my opinion, do I really care about this? No. And for liberals themselves, are they going to convince the public to care about this? No. It's not an issue that directly affects people. No one really is directly impacted or negatively affected by Trump, bulldozing and, clearing out the East Wing and then building something new there. there is maybe the not so good optics that it's happening during the government shutdown, but no one cares about the government shutdown in the first place. So why are we this concerned about, Trump doing something that you're not supposed to be doing, or allegedly not supposed to be doing during the White House? And somebody, Normative says, does this show the right moving beyond conservatism? In his question, I don't really get that impression that it's like something moving beyond conservatism. I mean, it's like conservatives can, tear down, tear down buildings and stuff and rebuild other things. I don't think it's like so much written in conservatism that you have to maintain the White House as is. You could have seen Reagan or someone else do something like this if the moment was right. But no, I don't see them moving beyond conservatism whatsoever. I think it's just, he's willing to do things that he feels he has the capital to do now, when in the first advent he didn't. He was, backed into a corner, and he's been wanting to do this for years. Even before he was running for president, he wanted to do it, and now he feels he's going to do it. And so, generally, it's a fine thing to happen. I don't feel the need to really go out there and defend it and be like really empowered to like defend everything. There's some like degree of people who on the right where there's two reactions to everything Trump does. There's the one where it's like immediate soy jacking and this is the most coolest thing, awesomest thing ever, and we have to go nuts over it. I generally defend most of the actions, but some actions, if I don't care for or I don't like, I'm not going to force myself to like, soy jack over. And even some of the posting, like there was like this weird Halo post, the White House posted yesterday, and it's like rather lame. I'm not going to be soy jacking over it, but people are like, this is awesome. He's standing with gamers. And that's one reaction. And the second one is to think that everything he does is like the work of Satan, and you have to just like immediately get angry about it. And even if he does something good, you have to find the secret ulterior motive that this is meant to distract us from something that's terrible that he's doing. I generally don't like either having to be forced into either impression. I just like to assess things on where they are. And it's like with the ballroom. It's just like something I don't care about. It's not costing taxpayers anything. It's probably a necessary addition, but I don't feel that strongly about it, nor am I going to rush to, defend it in any way. But it is something with like libs getting upset about it. And they're just flailing about for something to grab onto. Is that right now they don't have anything to grasp. And they don't have anything to highlight and push forward on their own side. They're stuck with, they had Graham Plattner to rally behind, and then he had a Totenkopf tattoo, and now they're shying away from Graham Plattner as the future of the Democratic Party. They don't really have a leader of the party. They don't have a message, and they're just trying to find something that they can motivate the public to hate Trump as much as they do. And they're hoping that it can be done with the ballroom, but it's currently not working for them. So, Renown asked if I could imagine myself being in the ballroom, meeting a lovely debutante who'd go on to rule your world for the rest of your life. I don't probably, maybe I could go to the ballroom there in Trump's term. I don't know. Probably not, but maybe. I don't know if I'll meet a lovely debutante there. But we'll think about that. So that is my take on the ballroom drama. Now we're going to go with the gambling question, which I'm going to have to go through say Nitro asked about this. Pay-per-view asked about this. K-Max asked about this. And who else? Oh my, I think Sharecrop asked about this. No, Sharecrop didn't ask. So somebody else asked about this as well. Hold on. Well, that might be just who everyone is. If I missed anyone who asked about the gambling, the NBA thing, let me know and hit me up. So here's what happened: is that there's a bunch of dozens of people have been arrested. I don't know if dozens, tens. We'll say tens, who've been arrested involved in this mafia gambling operation where they were using Chauncey Billups and Terry Rozier. I might be mispronouncing his name. I'm not the most. I know he's like a starting basketball player, but I wasn't that familiar with him until he got arrested. But Rozier and Billups. I'm familiar with Billups when he was a player. He's now a coach, and they're the prime. They're the biggest names who are involved in this. It's not so much tied to the gambling apps as it's tied to illegal gambling dens run by the mafia. And some of them where they were bringing them to these poker tables where these rich guys would be like, oh, it's a basketball player. I'm so enthralled. And then they would use them to kind of dupe these guys into getting more saddled with debt and more pay and more indebted to the mafia and just lose a ton of money at these gambling tables. If you ever watch like Sopranos, there's an episode where one of Tony's friends, who's outside the mafia, gets massively in debt to the mob over one of these card games, and their relationship ruins over this. And so they've done this. This is kind of an old mafia trick where they bring these guys in. They're always going to lose, and they're going to be, coughing up a ton of money that they have to give up. This is not like being in debt to the bank. This is being in debt to the mafia. So they're going to pay up one way or the other. And so they were using them for this. They were also using them to throw games in a way to help their own bets. And this is a massive problem with the NBA because that's drawing up the possibility, and people have been talking about this a while for the NBA, is that players have been throwing games and poorly performing in order to rig them on behalf of certain bettors. And this has been a problem for sports in a long time. Boxing was heavily dominated by this throughout much of its history, that boxers would throw fights in order to because the mafia or gamblers were pushing them to do so. This is a massive problem for boxing. This was a problem for baseball back in the early 20th century, where a World Series was thrown on behalf of organized crime. And now it's probably most likely happening in basketball, where players will certainly sit out certain games depending on people making bets on them, like whether their team will win. And if they sit out this game, they know their team's going to lose. And so that's going to help people who are betting against the team. And there's been numerous problems with the NBA. And I think NBA, it's the easiest to rig it or to be less obvious with throwing games than it is, say, with like football. First off, at football, if you're throwing a lot of interceptions at a quarterback, you're going to be benched. You're not going to be starting anymore, and you're going to lose money. So it's like, unless they're paying you like $5 million to throw a game, which they're not, or something that can compensate for your lost income coming from being a terrible quarterback, it's not going to happen. It's much harder. Also, the fact is, like, it's much more team oriented. And so if you're letting down your team, the other players are going to hate you and really push up against you. Not saying that won't happen in basketball, but in basketball, I feel it's easier to get away from. Like, you miss a shot you would otherwise would have gotten, or you commit a foul that hurts your team, that, it's easy. It seems a lot easier to throw a game than it is in football. Or you could fake an injury, hobble off, and there's a lot. I feel like there's much more opportunities to throw away a game without it being that obvious. So, and NBA's had the most questions circle around them with this. Now, I think some of the people who are asking this were wondering if this will have an impact on sports betting, because one of the things that could push the league to care about, or to make people push against sports betting, is if there becomes the knowledge and understanding that games are being thrown and being rigged on behalf of bets. There's a lot of concern with referees in other sports. This is also why referees are getting a lot more scrutiny. And, they've always been hated, but now they're really getting it because people are wondering, hey, is this guy doing this because, somebody paid him off and said, we want you to help this team lose, and call a lot of penalties on him. And there's concerns over that, especially with college football, because they're less supervised and less regulated in college football than they are in the NFL. NFL, they really go through the hurdles to make sure that all these guys are fully vetted, fully, on board. And there's a lot more oversight for the NFL referees than there are with college football. But it could still happen in the NFL. It could still happen in the NBA. It could still happen in baseball. Like up until they get robot umpires, which they're talking about for baseball. Which I don't know if you could rig the machine, but maybe through a hack. So they do have these issues that if the audience starts to think that games are being thrown on behalf of organized crime or some illegal rigging, that there will be calls to demand a restriction of sports gambling. And there is a possibility of that, because if people feel that the thing is rigged, first off, that's going to create the government's intention is going to be looking into this with massive investigations into the major sports betting platforms that they're involved in it, into the pro leagues' involvement in the sports betting, and many other concerns. And that's going to bring in law enforcement and congressional attention if they are actually doing that. So, and Congress may consider that it's now necessary to pass a bill in order to deal with this menace. So if the impression gets out there that all these games are rigged and that you are getting robbed of your money, that the sports betting is completely fake, this is like pro wrestling, even though I know that there's no gambling on pro wrestling, but it's already set by someone else, people are going to get mad. And then there's going to be outrage that there's all these people racking up debt on behalf of fake results. And there's something very upsetting to Americans if they found out all their sports were fake. It's also like why there was a lot of anger over the Chiefs continuing to win games that they shouldn't have won. I mean, it seemed there was one year, it was the 2024 Super Bowl, where it seemed like the entire postseason was rigged in favor of the Chiefs so they could get the Taylor Swift Super Bowl, which they did. And people are like, this is all rigged. But people are mad about that. But once they have the evidence for it, I mean, there's probably no evidence for getting the Chiefs in. Or maybe the league was like, hey, can you guys not call penalty? They called the refs like, don't call penalties on the Chiefs. We really need the Taylor Swift Super Bowl. Maybe they could have done that, but they, if that hadn't gotten out, there'd been a massive backlash against it. And so it's only something like this. It has to be with the negative effects of gambling, where the games are being rigged or players are being attacked, like physically attacked or potentially killed over how they perform in games. Like there's like a deranged gambler who lost all his money on a game, and he goes and tries to kill like the star player who he blames for losing all his money. That could very well happen. And if that happened, there would be such a horror over this. Like if, one of the top NBA players got assassinated, or one of the best NFL quarterbacks got assassinated of some sort, or there was an attempt on their life, that we have to solve this problem and we have to limit and restrict it. Pay-per-view was wondering if it could be a measure of the Longhouse taking over. I'm not quite sure what that is. Is that one, women are getting involved in the gambling, and a lot of the gambling ads are now directed towards women. If you ever watch any of the games, they'll see like women in there, and they'll be like, oh, I just placed my bet, because they're wanting to have, like, for everything that's in America, they're trying to get a bigger demographic, a bigger consumer demographic, and of course they want to get women involved in this so they can make more money. I don't know if it's going to be necessarily women curbing it. It's one of the few hobbies men have. Almost, if you're going to say like, we're going to hope the Longhouse takes care of sports betting, it's almost an argument in favor of sports betting, because men have so few hobbies that women can't just interrupt and destroy it, especially if they're in a relationship or starting a family, and then it's like, this is another thing the wife's going to take away from them in order to make them go shopping with them or whatever. It's I don't think it's really going to be the women who are involved, because it's very hard. I mean, you would hope that women would get involved when their husband is involved in gambling, because one, that's like the family's money. But even I know like some compulsive gamblers who are married and have kids, and they're just blowing tons of money, and they'll bet on WNBA and women's college basketball. And apparently the wife is okay with it. It's like, maybe the woman should take more interest in, if their husband has a FanDuel account rather than if he's playing video games. But generally doesn't end up like that. So that could be a positive for society, but it's almost you almost become to sympathize with sports betting if that's like the argument for keeping it away. But yeah, if this isn't going to be the last gambling scandal in professional sports, this is the first of many. And there's probably going to be even more people involved in this. There's the rumors that LeBron James may have a connection to it, because one of the things that they handed out to their gamblers is an injury report from LeBron. LeBron hasn't been charged with anything yet or been accused of any wrongdoing. But if that came out that one of the star players of the NBA had involved him in this, then that creates a greater pushback and greater social and political capital to try to solve the sports betting thing. The issue with it is that people are making way too much damn money from sports betting. Now, not the individual bettors, they're losing all their money, but the institutions are making so much damn money that it would be there's a massive economic argument to make to oppose any type of restrictions or regulations on it, because all these people are just making hand over fist and money from it. And like, think about it, like all the pro leagues, like they were all struggling prior to the legalization of sports betting. They were losing audience, they're losing fans, they're mired in these controversies. Then sports betting comes back and their ratings are through the roof. They're getting more attention paid to the games. And, America's even more sports obsessed than it was in the 2010s, where there was worries that maybe millennials might not take to sports as they grow older and be as invested in it as older generations. Now they don't have to worry about that. And they're getting millennials and Zoomers hooked in through sports betting. So they don't want it. And then the cities that depend on these sports teams don't want to refuse it. And on the stadiums, that all these people are just hooked in to the sports betting octopus or the infrastructure that they don't want to lose all that money. And that's going to be a compelling argument for Congress, because it's like, look, there's going to be massive economic downsides. You're going to really hurt this professional sports leagues if you ever limited sports gambling or try to restrict it, is that they would all take a massive hit. And these are very powerful institutions that lawmakers don't like to run up against. So those are the compelling arguments. But I think if there's these really negative outside effects of it's all becoming clear that a ton of games are rigged, and there's a criminal element involved, and there's the potentiality of crazed gamblers losing all their money and then committing violence against these players, that could create the amount of public backlash to restrict sports betting. But it's going to come up against the economic interests of all these powerful institutions that are now dependent on sports betting. Every single pro sports league is dependent on sports betting. And if they lost sports betting, they're going to lose a huge chunk of their business. And they don't want to do that. And also they're going to see the ratings decline and many other things that are problematic. So that's going to be the upcoming battle over sports betting over the next decade. So we get answered all the questions from on that matter. We're going to finish up some of the people who had other questions. Renown had questions. Both Renown and Deuteronormative had 3 questions today, but with Renown, I didn't get to his question from last week, so I'll accept it. And Deuteronormative has one of these off the wall questions that I might take issue with. So we will read that just for this podcast. So his from Renown, his questions were: do you agree that Texas and Florida are the 2 most important red states? Yes, because they're most populous. What they do sets the standard for the rest of the country, and they generally are the most conservatively governed states. Arguably so, because what it matters more. If you look at like Idaho, Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, a lot of times they pass like liberal shit. But Texas and Florida seem to be the leading edge of everything, and they gain a ton of attention because they're the most populous, conservative controlled states. So they are definitely the most important red states because what happens there matters for the rest of the country, while something that happens in Wyoming or Mississippi doesn't matter as much. And who is the better governor, Abbott or DeSantis? It pains me to say this. My whole body revolts against saying this. But unfortunately, by a slight margin, it's Ron DeSantis. I'm America's governor. I'm so pleased Scott would know that I've taken so many strong stances against the woke mind virus that he thinks I'm the better governor. But with Ron, slightly better. Abbott does too many dumb things. And also, Abbott really isn't a leader on this. It's more that he's responding to his legislature that is pretty red, that pushes him forward. While DeSantis is more of a leader on this. They're both problematic in their own degree. And also, if you really compare Abbott or DeSantis, like on paper, they're about the same in terms of what they are able to do. I mean, it's more that Texas Republicans are better than Florida Republicans, are more pioneering in what they want to do than in Florida. So, but in terms of the governor and who leads more on these issues, it's more DeSantis. So I would say it's more, I would have to pick DeSantis, but DeSantis is a lot lamer than Abbott. I mean, Abbott's stuck in his wheelchair. I don't think I thought he might run in 2024 if Trump wasn't running, but that's not happening. I don't think he's going to be in a place to run in 2028, so I don't have to worry about him. But DeSantis is probably going to run again, and so we're going to have to. But it's good for me because I'm going to be able to impersonate him more in the coming years. But we're going to have to deal with his extremely annoying fan base even more. So if I was reminded of how terrible his fan base is, I would say Abbott just because he's less annoying than DeSantis. But DeSantis is probably a better one because he's the one leading in these efforts in Florida. It's not so much him following his legislature. Well, with Abbott, it's him following his legislature and other conservative powers in Texas that he does good things. But on paper, they're about the same. So that's it. And so Durda Normative has two more questions. He said, can the AFD grow significantly beyond East Germany? Yes, they're already doing so. They're beginning to get a lot of support in the West. Their numbers are increasing there. So they are definitely growing significantly beyond East Germany. There is a type of ceiling nationally for them because Germans are unfortunately very spiritually, politically cucked. And it's hard to imagine that more than a third of the country will ever accept AFD. I think they can get a third at least, and they can start to see, and they're starting to see numbers go into the 20s, the 20s, over 20% in parts of the West. So they could definitely grow significantly beyond East Germany. And I think I think they can exceed a third in East Germany. I think you could see them getting maybe even 40% support there. But there is a hard ceiling on them, especially with the firewall that all the other parties have. And the only way that they can really take power is if the CDU eventually takes down their firewall against the AFD and begins to work with them. And they can form a coalition government where the CDU is the junior partner and the AFD is the senior partner. That could potentially happen this decade, but there's still a lot of work to do. Now with his third question, which I always say, don't send 3 questions. A lot of people forget that they have limits on their questions. And they just send them. Now, granted, I could just save that for the mailbag, but this question is so off the wall that I'm having to address this today. And he said, the question is, I'm watching this Latina single mother get smooched on by an Indian male at the brewery. Do you think there will be a trend going forward of Indian men stepping up to do the jobs American men won't? I have to wonder, it's like, why am I being asked this question? I mean, I don't think Indian men are really the ones like stepping up for single moms for whatever reason. I mean, maybe we could see that, but it seems to be more of a kind of a white guy thing to be the man who steps up. It always seems to be a white guy thing. I think Hispanic men are willing to do that, but for whatever reason, all their groups are not as interested in it. So, no, they could, but for Indian men, I think it's, for a lot of other groups, they do have this inherent opposition to being the man who steps up, because it's like, oh, you're already used goods, I'm not going to do that, and their minds. But I think Indian men don't really, it's not really in their nature to do so, as they're taking on a responsibility. For a lot of the Indian men, they don't want to necessarily do that. They just want to have the woman for all to themselves, in my experience. But maybe they could. I don't know. This is, even though it's a funny question, I think sometimes we need to wonder whether these are the most appropriate questions to ask. Because at the end of the day, the real answer is I have no earthly idea of whether they're going to step up or not. And I think it's that for a lot of Indian men that they're more of a higher class rung than what they're going to deal with single moms, that they're not going to be the ones as well. So I don't know. But the off the wall questions are funny, but let's think through these. And also, a reminder: you're only allowed for 3 questions. I know he could have just put mailbag. I'm not sure if he knew that, but I felt the need to answer this question today. Ken also had a question about Germans. He had another question as well, but he said, why do West Germans and not East Germans have this war guilt problem? You think the East, being run by communists, would have imbibed more anti-national sentiment? Well, I think it's that with the East Germans, they realized that it was all bullshit, and they were told it's bullshit, and that they shouldn't have listened to the East German government. Also, that they saw this as a foreign imposed government on them, which it was, and they were less beholden to what it told them. And they were more likely to reject what it was told to them than I think with the West. Is that also East Germany didn't promise prosperity. Is that propaganda works if you're offering prosperity with it. And that's what the West Germans is. West Germans, they built a stable, prosperous society where they could finally achieve their European dream. While in the East, that wasn't the case. In the East, they had an oppressive government that arrested them for saying the wrong thing at a party and stuff. So there was more of a hostility towards taking it in with the compared to the West Germans. Also, the East Germans were less inducing guilt in the population than the West. Even though for a lot of West Germany's early history, they were, just moving on, didn't want to dwell on the war, but over time they began to develop this guilt complex of like, our fathers and grandfathers did these horrible things, or ourselves did these horrible things, and we have to atone for it. East Germany, it was seen as a unpopular government that was foisted on them by the capitalists. And it wasn't Germans' fault. The Germans their guilt wasn't taken along with it. And also East Germans, the funny thing is that they specifically had anti-fascism as part of their national ideology, as part of their state ideology. But it wasn't just carrying on because it died with the government. And I think it's also with East Germans is they're generally poorer. And they didn't get as much diversity because, it's a poorer area, so there's less need to or not so much, I don't want to say need, but there's less of a push to bring in migrants into, poorer areas where you already got, people are willing to do any type of labor that's available. So, and then, after, unification, East Germany realized how poor they were, and now they're getting all these migrants there, and they're taking jobs and taking their, benefits, and there was much more of a hostility towards migrants in East Germany than there was in West Germany. Because West Germans generally had more prosperity and were willing to buy into the war guilt, and the war guilt as it's a personal guilt on their part, rather than East Germany where the individual German is less blamed for it, and it's more of the evil government that was foisted on them by the capitalists that they have to worry about. And they were able to create a separation from that. Well, with the West Germans, it was like, we did this, we're responsible, we need to atone. Well, the East Germans are like, we just need to create an anti-fascist state and we're all good. We don't need to worry. We don't really need to obsess over our guilt as much as the West Germans did. So, and they were able to achieve that, and I think it's also West Germans were able to achieve that by the government that West Germans built is now the government of Germany. There wasn't this type of earth-shattering event where they realized it's all BS, or and even most of the East Germans realized it's BS. before the wall fell, they were able to offer prosperity, so that offered a carrot inducement to them to buy the propaganda much more than East Germans. So, I mean, that's the case with all the Warsaw Pact countries. There's all these take that like, well, it'd been better if Europe had been controlled entirely by the communists. That's not really the case because one, if they controlled all of Europe, Europe would be like even more screwed now than it is. Like it'd be an entire like Eastern Europe, like all the Warsaw Pact countries have serious economic and social problems that still stem from the communist imposition. They are more based in a way because I think it's owing to their particular situation that they didn't get the benefits of prosperity. They're still struggling much more so than the West, and they're less inclined to believe this stuff, especially because they now, all the communism that they've been taught was BS, and now they're being taught something else different, and they realize that goes up against their ethno-nationalist instincts, that they're more likely to be based. But it's I'm not one of those people who's like, it was better for the Warsaw Pact to take over. No. I think if it's actually, if they, a lot of these countries would be probably more right wing. Or they'd be just as right wing if there had never been communism imposed on them. I'm not one of those people who's like, well, communism, liberalism kills the soul, but communism only kills the individual or something. I'm not one of those people who believes in that. I think it's rather stupid for the right to soy jack or the Warsaw Pact, especially because these countries sucked and they're ruled by like the most unimpressive people imaginable. And just because they sucked so much and that the people today are more right-wing than in the West doesn't mean that it was a good thing. But I think it's just that they were more, in the East, they're more likely to see what they're taught as bullshit because it's clearly foreign imposed on them, while in the West, it's coming from, even though it is being pushed by America, it comes with a whole lot more benefits, and it's coming from people that they elected themselves rather than imposed on them by the Soviets, that they were able to go along more with that liberalism. Ken's other question is like, do you like the band Brand New? No, I hate pop punk. No, I don't like. Unlike a lot of other millennials, I don't like pop punk. If you like that you like that, but no, I don't like Brand New. So that's my answer to that. Sharecrops got a question. He said, some people are concerned that virtual AI relationships might fulfill the male fantasy of total control. Do you think that in 20 years it could pressure women back into a traditional role where their primary value is producing children? Hell no. No, AI relationships, it's a cope for us to believe that that's going to happen. Really, AI relationships are be more of a problem for women, or that they get into this, because a lot of women, they want that type of emotional coddling that comes from relationships, and that they have a stable man to unload all their problems onto and stuff. For men, the primary reason to have a relationship is the physical parts, and you can't have that with your AI partner. And also, it's gonna be seen as like something that a loser does, because you're not getting laid from your AI girlfriend. And also, there's a hilarious video. I don't know how real this is, but a guy had an AI girlfriend, and he's like cooking, and he must have programmed her to be like the standard girlfriend, because the whole time the AI girlfriend is going off on him about how he's cooking the meat, and you're like, wow, this sucks. Even in AI relationships, you have a terrible girlfriend. So I don't think if that's like the selling point of like you have an AI girlfriend and she acts just as standard way that other girls are, that this is going to convince women to do that. And also, if women feel they have to compete with an AI girlfriend, they're going to get the ick so bad that they are never going to want to consider that guy. Never at all. Like, if you are a guy that they have to worry about getting an AI relationship with, they're going to want nothing to do with you. And the guys that are going to get in AI relationships are not guys with a lot of options. They're going to be that this is the only option that they have. That they are such losers that they will take a computer program nagging them over their cooking. That's not like really competing. But with women, men aren't going to view that as an ick, because men are much more desperate and much more willing to overlook things than women are. And men are less, and overall less choosy and less picky. And also, women are going to want that pick me up of like some, if a computer program's telling them they're hot and they're a badass bitch or whatever, and is like, oh, tell me about your problems, they will get that emotional fulfillment from a computer program for that, then much more so than men will. And no, it's not going to pressure women to do anything. And in a lot of ways, it's going to pressure women to be even less are even more reluctant to get in a relationship, or more picky and more choosy and more demanding, because they're like, well, you know what, you're not as concerned with my problems as Chip, my AI friend. And so Chip always listens to me. Chip never interrupts me. Chip also isn't watching the game on Sunday. And it's for men. It's more going to be that men are competing against the AI programs than women are going to be competing with our AI programs. So, no, the AI things it's going to be actually worse for dating and the marriage rate. Um, it's not going to make women more pleasant. It's not going to make, and if any case, it's going to make them even more deranged and unpleasant, because you're now competing against an AI program. And it's also with guys, or guys are probably going to be, the ones who are going to get into AI relationships are going to be even more losers, and they're going to be less inclined to improve themselves to make them more competitive on the dating market and try to marry a nice girl and have kids. So it's actually going to be a nightmare created by the AI relationships. But there will be funny things, so at least we'll produce funny content. So at least we have that to look forward to. Now we have a new Convolete member, a Tiberian fan. He had a question. He said, "Would it be worth it for the right to preempt the left on the anti-big tech turn play up the anti-BlackRock VC sentiment? Well, not every R word would, or R would, obviously, I think he meant Republican, would obviously be on board with it. Candidates with perhaps more chuddy views on social economic issues might be able to put peanut butter around the pill by going after the arguably very real decline in the overall fidelity of products as a result of AI, jeet slop online, and VC and shitification of formerly quality products." Sort of, but I mean, the BlackRock stuff goes into a lot of that type of silly populism that a lot of like people like Josh Hawley and others are promoting, where they're like, we want to take down big capital, and we're not that fan of capital. I think there is something to dealing with BlackRock buying all these properties and stuff, but the real issue with like homes are not BlackRock. The two issues are old people sitting on their homes, and then immigration. Now, we're trying to do something about immigration, but we still have the old people. But it makes for much more better political capital to focus on BlackRock. I'm not a fan of BlackRock, and I think there's something issue there, but a lot of people generally ignore those two issues, or especially ignoring the old people, because old people are the most powerful voting demographic. They always turn up to vote. You can't piss them off. That's why we can't do entitlement reforms or anything. So we focus on BlackRock. We focus on this evil capital to do this. I mean, the left is going to go into it as well with their populism. Their populism isn't going to be limited just to big tech. It's going to be overall these evil corporations, and they've been going off on BlackRock and VCs a lot, and a lot of those VCs are now starting to turn to the Republicans, for better or for worse. So I don't think there's really a way to preempt it, but it's more that you're seeing a lot of people on the right try to jump on board with this type of populism, with Hawley leading the front. And the only difference is with the left, they warn about neoliberalism or whatever, while we warn about transhumanism, and they're going to try to treat human-robot hybrids and stuff. Or they're already hybrids, according to Candace Owens. But, yeah, it could work. But I generally think for Republicans, it's better to focus on the issues that matter to us, that get us the most votes. And that's the identity issues and promising a stable economy and just stable leadership. And being opposed to the left-wing impositions on their life that make their lives worse. And I think I'm becoming more turning against the economic populism, because it leads us to distract from the identity issues, or even take negative and bad stances on the identity issues, as well as adopt things that could, upset the economy and limit our ability to achieve what we want to achieve. And I've always worried about that. As that said, our main goal needs to be protecting the economy and keeping it stable so we can do mass deportations, so we can ban affirmative action, so we can go after DEI. And if we have an unstable, crappy economy, and if we're doing a lot of experiments with the economy, then that limits our ability to accomplish our identity goals. And so that's always my view on that. I don't have a problem if BlackRock is doing woke stuff and that they're contributing to some of the problems that are going on in the country. I'm fine with that, but and compared to the big tech stuff, but the left is going to get into that as much. There's going to be at least a crypto populism among the left that's going to flourish for 2028, and whoever wins is going to not be like Hillary 2016, where she's saying that breaking up the banks won't end racism, which was which was like the encapsulation of woke capital, or what we thought of woke capital. But it created a false impression that capital itself was promoting wokeness to prevent populism, when in fact it was more capital being held hostage by these woke HR departments and these activists, and then going along with it because they felt it was necessary. Now they've turned on it because they realize it's bad for business. You're not going to see someone give that message. They're going to say, we need to break up the banks to end racism. And we need to because these guys are really bad. And so I don't think you're going to be able to preempt it. I think it's the way is that we stand for a stable economy, and we stand for borders and national identity and the American dream against the left's radical wealth redistribution. And we could just point to cities that have these socialists. Mom Donnie's probably going to be mayor of New York. Brandon Johnson's mayor of Chicago. And it's like, look, if you want to take this on a national level or see what it looked like on a national level, look at Zoran, look at Brandon Johnson. And I think that'll be a compelling enough argument. Luke's got questions. Luke said, can we get an IQ something on the history of the KKK? Probably. I kind of avoid some of the really far right stuff because, don't want to come across as an endorsement of some of these activities and some of these groups. But probably at some point, you'd probably have two different ones. I'd probably do one in the Second Klan, one individually on that, and then the efforts against Reconstruction, or the South's resistance towards Reconstruction. And so, yeah, I'll probably do some IQ supplements that touch on that. Two, how effective do you... Oh, he also asked about the ballroom. So I forgot to mention Luke in that, but yes, he asked about the effectiveness of the rhetoric. I don't think it's that effective. They're just, as I said in the intro, they're grasping for something to, counter this, and this is all. They're hoping that this is enough to rally their base around, but I don't think it is going to be enough. I think they're going to move on to something else with time. Nitro had another question. He says, this is breaking the one question rule. Well, I'm glad someone cares about the one question rule. So feel free to ignore. But did you see Cuomo's AI Mom Donnie attack ad? And this is really funny. No, he did like a whole AI ad that's pretty racial. It shows a bunch of black criminals doing crime and stuff. And it says that basically Mom Donnie's going to allow criminals to run rampant all over New York City. I don't think it's going to work. I mean, Cuomo's kind of having a funny race where he's like leading into Islamophobia and like the crime stuff, but it's already too late. He should have probably done some of this stuff in the primary, but instead he's just focusing. It's still just focused on like Israel and anti-Semitism, and it didn't work in the Democratic primary. It's not going to work in the general election, and Slee isn't dropping out, so Mom Donnie's going to be the mayor, but it is still a funny ad, so I recommend watching it if you get the chance. Armed Day Enjoyer asked, how did liking this arts and aesthetics become gay-coded? Seems like starting around Generation X, being a man meant only caring about work and drinking beer while watching sports. I don't know. People have been into arts, have always been a little effeminate or a little bit different, not the most macho men types. That's always been the case. It's even been the case with anyone in intellectual activities. It's that I don't think it's so much gay-coded, but it's always been there that that's weird. You shouldn't do this. So you're getting, especially within American culture, within European culture, the aristocrats, who are the pinnacle of masculinity, loved being patrons of the art and getting into art. Here in America, it was more that you're doing straight business, you're working, you're doing normal things. And if anybody's wanting to be like a writer or an artist or a painter, that's seen as unpractical and potentially gay coded. And there wasn't as much, especially in our early history, there wasn't as much patronage for the arts. It only really started to emerge in the late 19th century, early 20th century, which is one of the reasons that we developed less high culture than Europe. Is that Europe, European aristocrats and the church, most of the church, both the Catholic Church and some of its high church Protestant rivals, were all sponsoring art, and so were the nobility. While in America, we were founded by low church Protestants, and they were not as keen on art as their high church opponents. But so there's something with that. With the gay coded, it's always been seen, even in European society, as something weird and gay coded, and something you're not supposed to do, and something that becomes mockery. There is a story from Germany, actually, of Reinhard Heydrich, who was one of the top SS men. When he was in the Naval Academy in Germany, he brought his violin, and they all like hazed him for that. They're like, what the hell is this? This is gay. And so it's just a common thing for like men. It's like, that's playing violin, that's gay, or drawing. I don't know when it became gay coded, but it's always been seen as fruity and something off the wall and off the beaten path. And generally anything that's seen as off the beaten path is mocked and made fun of. And that generally happens with anyone who gets into arts and to intellectual pursuits. And there's been a disproportionate number of gay men involved in the arts and intellectual pursuits as well. So I don't think it's around Generation X. You would have probably even seen this as a more hostility towards this among older generations. Like if you're in 1910 South Carolina and you're really into drawing, you've probably been beaten up. You've been more likely to have been beaten up at that time than maybe in like 2000 or 2010 South Carolina. So it's just seen as something different, and people don't like, the herd generally reacts negatively towards anything that's seen as different. So that is my answer to that. And so Concerned Citizen has got two questions, or actually, no. No, yeah, it's just one question. I answered this on the mailbag. You said, should we care about Argentina? Are we pro-Milei? I don't care that deeply about it. We generally are offering them a bailout because it's in our backyard, and if they have massive problems, generally anything that happens in Latin America comes to impact us, whether through migrants, like what we're seeing with Venezuela, or just instability in the region, and it offers the opportunity for China and Russia to move in, or geopolitical foes. I mean, whether we should see Russia as a geopolitical foe or not, that's another matter. But as of now, they have an interest in creating anti-American governments in Latin America, and that are more socialist or communist aligned. And so that becomes a problem if you have like a left-wing revolution or a move to a far-left government that's very hostile to America. And so they're bailing them out. Milei has his issues. He's maybe a little bit too obsessed with Israel, but generally I support his economic policies for Argentina. Maybe they're not working as well as they should, as we're offering them a bailout, but it's much better than the socialist policies of Maduro. So in a lot of questions, you either get a Milei or Maduro or a Bukele, and you prefer Milei and Bukele than you do to Maduro and Lula. So that's my thing, but they're not in our country. Some people get like really worked up about like all these various foreign leaders, they're like, we need a Bukele. I like what Bukele is doing in El Salvador, but you really can't replicate that in America. And it's the same with Milei and many other leaders. It's even the same with Orban. And they're generally governing less important countries. They're not governing the superpower that we are. So some people get a little bit worked up about it, but I'm not really anti-Milei. It'd be my answer to that. Gillis Enjoyers got two questions. He said, do you agree that any right-winger who speaks about housing policy in terms of anything other than immigration is missing the point? My view is that zoning laws or property taxes don't matter in the grand scheme of things, as we already have more than enough housing in the country, just too many people. Housing prices is something that affects a large cross section of society, so a lot of people care about it. So it's also an opportunity to hammer home the immigration point and get them to care about that too. No, because well, I just talked about this, so I'm not missing the point. I mean, you have to include the immigration thing, but immigration won't fully solve it. It will help it. It alleviates some of the issues, but it's not the sole thing. I mean, the housing policy that we have right now, and also the other issue with housing, if you get rid of a lot of illegal immigrants, you're unfortunately going to have a smaller labor supply. Now, that's a worthwhile price to make, or a worthwhile sacrifice to make, in order to develop greater automation and to have better workers that are Americans. But you're going to have to deal with fewer, so it's going to be more expensive to build homes. Now, you might be building better homes, but that's still going to have housing problems. You have to keep in mind that with all these zoning laws and property taxes and old people sitting on their home are contributing a lot to the housing issues. You can include immigration in there, but immigration is not going to entirely solve it. It'll help it, but it will not be the whole matter. So, no, I don't agree with that, as I just went off on housing policies. You have to admit a huge problem in American society, independent of immigration, is how much wealth and power the old are hoarding. And also how you create a strange society where we're not being led by the young. We're not concerned with replicating ourselves and reproducing another generation, but we're primarily obsessed with maximizing comfort for the retirees. And that becomes that's a huge problem in Europe, where that's pretty much all their governments care about now, and it's a continental retirement home, HOA now. And it's increasingly becoming the case in America. And when everything becomes centered around the comfort of retirees, you also get a lot of terrible policies. Like, you get increased immigration because they're like, well, somebody needs to take care of me and somebody needs to buy me, build up these cheap homes. So we need immigration. And we also need people contributing to my Social Security. You know, when everything becomes obsessed with old people and old people wield all this wealth and power, you create the type of absurd societies we have in the West today. And you need to bring in immigration into this, but there's a general also problem that we're becoming a lopsided society in favor of the old against the young. We're robbing the young in favor of the old. And we can admit that while also caring about immigration. The real issue is that you should not discount immigration. And some people accused me of that when I went off on property taxes, but no, I admit immigration, it plays a role in it. But it's not the sole issue. So we can care about multiple things at the same time. And even when we bring in the old people, we should not then neuter or go weak on our stance on immigration. So, second question, do you think the second Trump term is getting more right-wing stuff done simply because of better execution and preparedness? Or do you think Trump himself has shifted his personal views to the right since his first term? And if it's the latter, do you think he's just responded to the base, or did the lawfare experience radicalize him? Well, it's more the first, but it's not so much Trump has shifted to the right. It's that the conservative base has shifted far more to the right since his first term, which allows him to have greater support for his policies, as well as the public has shifted to the right, or more to the center, and they're more apathetic and don't give a shit about this stuff like they did in the first term. In the first term, I mean, CNN was able to make a controversy over how many scoops of ice cream he had. And they would always act like democracy is under threat if he insulted a CNN reporter. And he was so hemmed in by his own party. His party was much further to the left than he was. He didn't have full control over his party. He didn't have full control over Congress. He didn't even have full control over his administration. His administration was staffed by all these disloyal hacks. Now it's staffed by true loyalists who will do whatever it takes to be most Trumpian and most MAGA as possible. And so is Congress. Congress is all now trying to compete to be more MAGA, more Trumpian. And he has full control over the Republican Party itself as well. He doesn't have to worry about these disloyal elements working against his agenda like he did in the first term. So it's better execution, better preparedness, and the Republican Party and the conservative base has moved more to Trump since the first term. And the general public doesn't care as much about this stuff, is more apathetic and apolitical, less involved, less tuned into the news than they were in the second term, which gives him greater social capital to achieve his ends than he did in the first term. And he also has like an actual institutional base and dedicated workers who are wanting to implement this, rather than the first term where he just hired random boomers who were outsmarted by the careers and Republican apparatchiks who worked against his agenda. Now, most of the people working in the Trump administration are fully committed to Trumpism and MAGA, and Congress is just an afterthought. They're not getting involved, and they realize that Trump controls the party and the base is on his side and the Republican Party is on his side, and they're not going to get rid of Trump. He's not an aberration like they thought he would be in the first term. So that's my answers to that. We got a question from Dollar Bill. He says, Trump announced he was ending trade deal negotiations with Canada over a TV ad paid for by the Canadian province of Ontario that featured an edited 1987 speech by Ronald Reagan denouncing protectionism. The Canadians were essentially broadcasting propaganda with the goal of subverting the president's agenda and driving a wedge between him and his base. Should ads from foreign governments be banned from the American TV? Yeah, I would support that. We would ban also ads from Israel, Saudi Arabia, a lot of the Gulf states. Gulf states love running ads on there. I remember growing up, I'd watch like sporting events, particularly with horse racing. They would have like Saudi Arabian ads. I'm like, what the hell is this doing on our TV? I support banning ads from foreign governments, unless it's tourism. If it's solely tourism, that's fine. But anything like this, like propaganda, talking about how awesome the country is and how we should support it, and like essentially lobbying the people to support particular stances like this undermining our president. No, we shouldn't accept that. That's why we ended trade deal negotiations. Canada really needs to learn a lesson. So I fully support owning Canada in any way we can. So that's my stance. And then New England Refugee has a question on this fundraising text that he got. House is acceptable, and it's like $6,000 stimulus check from Trump. It was yours to begin with. Would you accept it? Obviously, these scam texts are bad. They seem to be not as bad as they once were. I remember in like 2019, they were horrible. People got texts nonstop. But the reason why they do this is they work. And people are less upset about them than they were a few years ago. I remember a few years ago, I forget if it even extended into the 2020s, but I knew it was around the late end of the Trump admin in 2019, where they're sending like these really dubious text advertisements, and like influencers were getting worked up about it. Obviously, they shouldn't be sending this stuff, but you know they're market testing this stuff, and that's what works, unfortunately. But no, it's not acceptable. That would be my answer to that. They've always been doing that, but all like Democrats are now getting into this stuff as well, because it's unfortunately proved effective. I think we're down to LK Rurik for our last guy. Let me do a quick double check of everyone that we've got. Concerned citizen, armed day enjoyer, Nitro, everyone. Yeah, if I missed you, I'll get to you on Wednesday, so just harass me about that. He's got just one question today. He said, on the timeline that you quoted a video of a very accurate Hispanic wife VR simulator, should we use this technology for re-education of Latinx fetishes? I don't think that's a Hispanic wife VR simulator. That's just like a average girlfriend simulator who's just going to criticize you and nitpick whatever you do, unfortunately. So a lot of just American women do that. That's like the accurate thing. I don't think that was like a Hispanic. She did, even though it's like a block, I don't know if she was supposed to be Hispanic. I think she had red hair, so I don't think it was quite Hispanic VR simulator, and she didn't have the thick accent. Unfortunately, if we use that radio education, they're going to think this is like a problem with white women. White women will also engage in this behavior. They probably will do it in a less obnoxious way, but there's a lot of women who will just nag you to death. So unfortunately, I would probably say it's not a useful technology for re-education of Latinx fetishes. But there's other ways to do that. I think it's just showing what they look like at 30. I think that's all you really need to do about that. So, but unless we do have a very diverse fan base, so we're not saying all, but there are, the real issue isn't so much like with the trad women being submissive. It's like the Asian women that they always say, but it's really like the Asian women were more tiger wives and girlfriends, and they would be like screaming at you and throwing the grill off the ledge if you were doing this stuff, rather than the ordinary girlfriend that would just be nitpicking you. The trad wife Asian would be even going off on you even further. So those are some of my. I don't know if that's the best way to end this episode, but that is what we're going to end on. We're going to have more great content coming up this week, so be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.